Hey guys, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and today I'm talking about why social media will cause the death of us all if left in its current state and unchecked. And I think this is a very important topic that we need to discuss. I am not getting political here, even though there are political facts on the ground that we need to talk about, and I will explain that later as we dive into the root causes. And with that, let's start with the backdrop here. You may have seen anti-lockdown protests scattered around the United States last week. Oftentimes, these seem spontaneous. So, for example, let's say a person in City A decides to throw a protest, and then somebody in City B sees what City A is about to do and says, you know what, we're going to do this here. But the reality of the situation is that these are typically organized by one group or even a person, but they're designed to look like spontaneous grassroots protests or rallies. Now, the coronavirus anti-lockdown protests were known as Reopen, and they're no different. And I think it speaks to something larger that's going on here, just above and beyond this thing, but we're going to get to that in a moment. First, let's talk about the Reopen protests so you understand the mechanics of how this works. Much of this is actually coming from excellent reporting from Cyberscoop. Now, researchers at the threat intelligence firm Domain Tools, and I've actually worked with some of their people in the COVID-19 Cyber Threat Coalition, they're good folks, released research on Friday yesterday indicating that basically a pro-gun activist, Aaron Doerr, appears to be using a widely available software to operate dozens of websites, many of which include Reopen in the URL. And again, I'm not speaking to Mr. Doerr's politics, pro-gun, anti-gun, anything like that. That's irrelevant here. These are the mechanics of this. Now, the Domain Tools researchers conducted a technical examination of Reopen sites like Reopen Minnesota, Reopen Wisconsin, etc., to determine just how consolidated these sites are, despite the appearance that they look like they are standalone entities. These sites are registered basically to local gun advocacy groups using a platform called One Click Politics. This is a digital organizing service that allows a single person or even a group to manage dozens of websites, run email promotions, and actually collect money from people that want to donate to their cause, whatever that cause is. Now, the network starts in this specific case with Mr. Doerr's personal website at the very top level, and then underneath him are 13 different websites for various pro-gun rights coalitions and all of that. And then underneath them, there are many dozens of state Reopen sites that are basically part of this hierarchy that was discovered by Domain Tools. Now, many of these sites are relying on the exact same SSL certificate, which is basically what we use to protect websites and encrypt traffic from the website, let's say to your phone or your computer. And that is basically gave Domain Tools some clues about who is owning and operating this. In this particular case, it appears that the domain administrators used Doerr's personal website to register many of these certificates. Now, the stated goal of Reopen websites is to end excessive quarantine orders enacted by state leaders in response to the coronavirus pandemic. And again, I am, if you're for or against this, it's not my business right now. That's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about is this methodology. Now, this methodology that Mr. Doerr and his group employed is known as astroturfing. Basically, it's a term to indicate that a coordinated political effort are basically made to look like organic grassroots movements, in various locales. It's basically a very similar technique to what Russia's Internet Research Agency used to fabricate and amplify protests around political issues in the 2016 presidential election. I've personally reviewed all 3,500 or so ads from the Internet Research Agency, and it's fascinating how they went after both sides of the political spectrum to drive a wedge, and it came from Facebook groups that seemingly seemed like it was made by some random American, just to put more information out there. Now, again, I am not getting political here. As I said before, I believe my job in cybersecurity and tech is agnostic to one's belief system. So you might be 100% on Aaron Doerr's side, and that's fine. I have no problem with that. You might be diametrically opposed to him. Fine. I really don't care, because that's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about here is asking this question. Why is this happening, and what can be done about the increasing divisiveness that we are seeing? And I think this is the real issue here, and the answer is multifold. But first things first, we need to dive into the root cause of this problem, which I think is simply this. People, at least here in the United States, are working off at least two competing sets of information in the world. Now consider for the moment the dichotomy in news services and news media here in the United States. Without labeling any of them liberal or conservative or even in the middle, a healthy percentage of Americans are being told to social distance, to stay quarantined, that researchers are working on possible cures to help those in need, and that this is all important because it's going to keep that infection and death rate down. And another healthy percentage of Americans are being told that this is overblown, it's not worth tanking the economy over this, that these numbers for the infection and death rate are going to be exaggerated, that there are currently quote-unquote cures, for lack of a better term. There's cures out there and we're not moving fast enough on those. And so now you've got two competing camps being put out by various news media outlets. And my point here is not to point fingers at one side or the other or say one side is right or wrong here. We can all debate this on our own time. My point here is, how on earth is a society like the United States going to create a cohesive and uniform response to any problem, any national problem like a pandemic, when we have two diametrically opposed set of quote-unquote facts? This complete breakdown in trust in leadership, as well as trust in media and even among ourselves, our friends, and our family, I think is at the core of what we are talking about here. I do think this can be fixed, but what's making this situation 1,000 times worse is social media. If this divisiveness was a car and it was driving down the road, social media came along and dropped a cinder block on the accelerator and cut the brake lines. This is what I am talking about. A massive research report done by Hidden Tribes shows us why social media is going to be the ruin if it's left unchecked and in its current state. Now, a majority of Americans, according to this study, are called the exhausted minority. These are 77% of us. I count myself in this group. They are basically fed up by polarization in America. And to quote the study, they know we have more in common than that which divides us. Our belief in freedom, equality, and the pursuit of the American dream. They share a deep sense of gratitude that they are citizens of the United States. They want to move past our differences. Now, 14% of our population are on the political wings, according to this study. And this study was massive. It was absolutely massive. I urge everybody to go to hiddentribes.us and actually read the report. You can download it for free. Now, these 14% that are basically on the political wings, both left and right, comprise this 14%. Are the ones that are basically screaming at each other online and anybody that doesn't meet their worldview, even if they're ideologically close. So let's say you're on the extreme left and you have somebody that's a little more left of center. That extreme left will still scream at the other lefties because it is a serious problem. It's the same on the right. The extreme right will scream at the righties even if they are not as extreme. This is the 14% that is really tearing this apart. And that, I think, is a very serious issue. I like to say that Twitter is where civility goes to die, and it's this 14% you're seeing basically hurling the worst possible insults at each other and just exploding issues left and right. Now, this leads us to social media because these free platforms are allowing anybody to create anonymous accounts and basically begin shouting from the virtual mountaintop whatever it is they want to shout. They allow easy integration of multiple pages and websites to allow the most ideologically driven among us to continue to drive this wedge into society. Their ability to shut down the most egregious offenders is retroactive. Facebook, when it finds things, is retroactive at best, which is helping fuel this fire. Literally fuel a fire in some cases, like the rash of 5G cell tower burnings, which started with a complete misinformation post in a Facebook group that had hundreds of shares before being taken down by Facebook. I actually did a complete video just breaking down that entire problem, and it started with Facebook and simply just misinformation from somebody that was not educated on this situation. And so, how do we fix this? How do we start turning this tide when this 14% is pulling everybody apart? Everybody seems seemingly screaming at each other. You see it everywhere, and it's a very serious problem. And I think the solution here in the long term is to try to start to reestablish trust amongst ourselves. And that's going to take time, education, and understanding. But I also think it's going to take a limitation of social media in some way. And I think that's something we need to discuss. Now, if we make one extreme side here, see that the other side, basically, the other extreme side is human, basically not horrible scum, hell-bent on destroying the country. Basically, we make them see that they have a different set of beliefs and values, but they also have the best interests of the country in mind, even though, let's say they have a different approach. We can both agree on the problem, and if we have two different approaches to it, we still want to solve the problem. We're just coming at it from different ways. Let's foster that understanding, so maybe by virtue of that, we can start undoing some of this issue. Now, I'm not an idealist here. I don't think that we're going to all be singing Kumbaya around the campfire anytime soon, but we can simply seek to understand another person or a group and their ideology, and I think that would go a long way to just calming everybody down and perhaps open up the realization that being on the extreme end of anything really isn't the best thing for you, for us, or for society. Now, I'm looking forward to the comments here and also the inevitable hate comments and mail that I'm going to get, especially on some of the sites that my videos and audio get replicated to. But I think this is something to talk about, and how we limit social media, I think, is another question, that I could do a whole other video on, because the last thing I want to do is hinder somebody's freedom of expression. But quite frankly, when civility is going to social media to die, it makes it very difficult to have a rational conversation when you are trying to, let's say, put up facts, not knowing the author's bias and just assuming that because that person is different than you and their worldview is different, that they are automatically biased or fake news or whatever that is. That is a very serious issue we have. And so I think we need to discuss this. I think we need to, have an open dialogue on this. But this is the root cause of this. This breakdown, I think, is what is fueling what we are seeing in society right now. And I think that's very important. And if you agree with me, I would appreciate you sharing this video, ideally with your friends or colleagues or loved ones or whatever, and maybe we can all start having this conversation. And I normally don't ask you to share like this, even though I have a preamble at the end. I'm asking you to now if you feel inclined. But that is your news of the day. That is your discussion of the day. And hopefully we'll get a good dialogue going. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe and stay online. Thanks, guys.